if you have an hour session, maybe use half an hour and then invite those questions afterwards. One thing that I always consider sort of a gauge of success is how many people are coming up to you after your session and wanting to go a little deeper.
Welcome to Agents of Change, a podcast about the future of B2B marketing, featuring insights from executives at top agencies. I'm Danielle O'Neil with Leadtail. Let's hop on in. Hi, welcome back to Agents of Change. Today, I'm super excited to have Katy Boos on with us. She is the CEO of Remix Communications. She has a strong background in all things events, thought leadership, and then also content creation and kind of how we can use events to help support all of the different areas and aspects of those thought leadership. So, hi, Katy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Danielle. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about Remix?
Sure. I started Remix in 2016. And it is a thought leadership agency, which basically means our goal is to get our clients out where they want to be seen. And that takes the form of speaking at events, as guests on podcasts, featured in content. So across all of those activities, my background is more traditional PR, but this was something that I felt like really interested me and was something that I wanted to focus on. So I really sort of decided to niche down and make it a specialty.
I love that so much, especially once you find that calling and really what it is that you want to do. And it just, it shines through in everything that you do with it. So it's so fun to just learn from you and learn more about the industry itself.
Great. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I love your podcast, and I know that the information that you share is always helpful to me when I watch others. So I hope I can share a little bit of information for some folks here.
Well, I know, of course, what we're going to talk about today. So I'm excited because you've got some great nuggets, especially as we're getting into events here. So let's just kind of dive in. One of the things that you and I talked about earlier is just the fact that events have gone through a lot of change over the past few years. Obviously, with the pandemic, everything that happened when we shut down in-person events, but there's been so much that has changed, even technology-wise, since then. So what are some of the biggest changes really that you've witnessed in the industry?
Yeah, it's really been massive change for events, especially since 2020, obviously. I would say probably the biggest thing that people would, think of is virtual events, right? Really came on strong in 2020, 2021, as we were all sort of trying to discern, should we be traveling or not? But we still want to learn. We still want to get together. But there have been some long lasting changes as a result of that. And some of that is events really, they keep that virtual component in most cases. So to some degree, we see that events are typically hybrid. There's the in-person component, but they'll have that, the virtual available. I will say in the last year or so, I'm seeing that starting to be a little more focused. So for example, where maybe in the past they were doing all the sessions in person and virtual, now it might just be keynote sessions that are virtual, so there have been some changes. Yeah. Outside of that, one of the things that's really been a change in the last few years is an emphasis on diversity. And it's no longer a nice to have diversity at the event. They have to. And that can really span diversity of thought, race, religion, outlook. I mean, all of these things. So it's really more, let's not just have, the traditional panel of people that we would see, ordinarily at events. So that has been a huge change. And I would also say sessions are a little bit shorter now, and maybe we can attribute that to all of us having, dare I say, like a smaller, attention span.
Attention spans, yes. Let's just embrace where we are as a society.
Right? I know, all of us. So yeah, but it's interesting because even if the session time frame, it might, you might have an hour for a session, but people are starting to look at ways to do like maybe a longer Q&A, or maybe just have a shorter session and people can have a little break between sessions. So those are some of the things that we're seeing that have changed with events recently.
Nice. I like it. And, one of the things that you had highlighted there was just how virtual events had changed. So what do you see as the role of virtual events as it stands now?
Yeah, I think they're still important. It's still really nice to, for like our clients, they don't have to travel as much. So when it's a virtual event and they can hop on and do a recording or, do a panel live, it's such a lower lift than, okay, I'm traveling across the US or globally. And so that part of it has been really nice for people. On virtual events, when organizations do have virtual events, they need to consider that people don't want to sit at their desks for 8 hours. Where if you're at a conference and you're popping up, you're grabbing a coffee and then you're running into a session, that's a different feeling than, I'm sitting at my desk and I'm going to watch 8 hours of, videos. So typically they're shorter, that I think that works better for people in their schedules. So, and then the last thing I would say about virtual events is that you do often get more of a global audience, which is really nice. It does. I would encourage people to really talk to the event organizer and determine how many people are from outside the US and kind of adjust your talk accordingly, whether it's, are you talking about only US specific things? Are you using terms that, maybe aren't outside the US? So things like that, just to consider who your audience really is.
That's a really good point as far as just even thinking about how you're promoting it, how you're talking about it, language that you're using. Is it truly globally inclusive?
Right.
That's
exactly.
A great reminder. And, thinking about, you'd also brought up that it's more accessible as, unfortunately we're in an age now with budget cuts and we're starting to see that maybe people don't have the amount of money to spend to go to these in-person events. I think that's where we might see even a little bit of lift, particularly this fall in virtual events, until the economy kind of picks back up. What have you seen? Have you heard any conversations around that? Anything else right now?
That's such a sort of up to the minute, change that we're seeing, because I was just at several events in March. So, just a couple of months ago, people were so excited to be in person. Turnouts were great. It just had such a good vibe to it because everyone wants to be there in person. Since then, there have been a lot of cuts in tech, obviously, a lot of layoffs, a lot of, minding the budgets. And that's where we've had clients say, I can't travel to that event in Amsterdam. That won't fly. So I think we're right at that turning point where I do think events will probably have to really take a hard look at that and be more open to including people virtually. So and maybe go beyond, as I said, maybe they're featuring keynotes right now, but maybe they will have to do more of their general programming virtually. So I think that's a wait and see with the economy and, potential recession and all of that. So yeah, I think that's kind of happening as we speak.
Yeah. So are you seeing still the same amount of participation like in hybrid events?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. But definitely more on the in-person side. That's what I've been seeing. Yeah, exactly. I think people will tune in for a couple sessions here and there, but it's been really interesting. Like we love South by Southwest. That's one of our favorite events. We were there in 2019, huge turnout, just massive. 2020 canceled, 2021 virtual. And then 2022, people were back, had such a good feeling to it. Then again, this year, even more. It felt like, 1.5 times 2022. So that turnout, that, excitement to be there, that's really what we're seeing.
Well, and I can tell just from my feeds alone, everybody is happy to be back in person and seeing colleagues and meeting with people that,
Mm-hmm.
they may have only talked to on LinkedIn or email before. It's that
Yeah.
excitement level is definitely there. Well, and not to mention that, how many of us attend these virtual events that we may have the event on this side of our screen, but we have work on this side and we're not
Yeah.
fully there. And yeah.
It's true. It's true.
Speaking from experience, not going to lie.
Well, we are multitaskers, right?
We are. This is very true. Very true. Speaking of that, I know you touched a little bit on the shorter attention span that we have. And
Mhm.
let's be honest, as a society, we have a much shorter attention span. We want information faster. We just want to get to the point. So what are some tips that you would give speakers, particularly like your own clients, when it comes to events and preparing for these sessions?
Yeah, I think first of all, really understand the audience. Know the demographics of who is sitting in the audience. And
Yep.
you can get that from the organizer, but also, I mean, a tip I have is get the sponsorship packet and go through there because it will give you a really detailed breakdown of who is there, their age, all of that, and their roles. Geographic locations, all the demographics. So
Such a
that's
good
sort of,
reminder. I think that tends to
yeah.
get overlooked by so many speakers.
Yeah. You don't want to, go over everyone's head or just come in and not be speaking the right language to them. So that's number one. Number two is, again, keep in mind, I think shorter sessions are so much more interesting. People love it when it's just lively, it moves, it goes along. Don't talk about your own products. That's
Yeah.
huge. And,
Yeah.
my rule of thumb with my clients is I think one mention of your company is enough. And then the rest of it, is really by affiliation. People can see that you are, president of XYZ and they know what that company does or they can figure it out. But, that's really important. I think, not having PowerPoint, not having a bunch of bullets. I mean, you can have PowerPoint, but not a bunch of bullets, right? Like death by PowerPoint. So that's super
Yes.
important. And having, imagery and speak to that and videos to break things up. We also love having partners or customers, other people join you on stage where it's appropriate. That can really make the conversation more natural and more lively, just a lot more fun.
Yeah, I love all of those tips, especially like no more death by PowerPoint. I think we've all seen enough PowerPoint. We don't need that anymore. Give us something that's going to speak to the point and just get
Mhm.
to what are you trying to convey here?
Exactly, exactly. And one more thing I would add too is if you have an hour session, maybe use half an hour and then invite those questions afterwards. One thing that I always consider sort of a gauge of success is how many people are coming up to you after your session and wanting to go a little deeper. And that's great. I mean, if you leave them with more curiosity, more questions, more interest, that's a great place to end. So, maybe that's half an hour, 40 minutes, whatever it is, that feels right to you for your content, but allowing that time for questions is great.
Yeah, those Q&A sessions, those can be key for those
Mm-hmm.
audiences and just having that moment that's almost kind of that one-on-one with whomever the speaker is to really
Yeah.
find out what it is that you want to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've seen myself many times where it feels like our sessions are cut short or, we get 5 minutes Q&A at the end of an hour and there's 35 people that all have questions and there's just not enough time. So then you almost feel robbed of really what you were there for.
Right.
So I
Right.
love the idea of giving them a little bit more time for it.
Yeah. And we've seen some really neat things come out of that too. We've seen, at an event I was just at, somebody from Stanford came up and said, "Oh, I'm doing this event and I would love to invite you to speak at that event." That's great. You're getting kind of a 2-for-1 there. And then other people who are like, hey, I'm a new grad, I'm looking for work, and I would love to talk to you further. And that's great for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And talk about giving it just another level of intimacy there.
Yeah, for sure.
I love that so much. Good tips for our speakers. Remember all of this next time you take on stage.
Lots to think about.
For all of us in attendance. Exactly. So moving on a little bit from the nitty gritty of the event, if you will, let's talk about executives and getting these executives on stage. So one thing that still lives in my head was from our earlier conversation, and we talked about thought leadership, and you were like, it's such an overused term, which it is. It 100% is. Everybody's a thought leader on one thing or another. But let's be honest, that's where we want our execs to go. We want them to be thought leaders. We want them to be able to really bring the brand to the forefront in new and exciting ways. And through this thought leadership, that's really one way to do it. So what does it mean to you, and how do we put that thought leadership into practice?
Yeah, it's having an opinion and being forward thinking. So, for example, if maybe you're a thought leader around AI, well, guess what? There are a million thought leaders on AI right now, right? So one thing that we encourage our clients to do is look a little narrower. So rather than saying I'm a thought leader on AI, maybe you're a thought leader on AI in marketing, AI in public relations, AI in real estate, whatever it is. Like, let's carve out what it is that you are really a specialist in. So that's one thing, is to really understand what's your niche. Events love a little narrower than coming in and being so broad. So that's one thing I would consider. In general, it's being well-rounded. It's, if you're a thought leader, it's being on stage, it's creating content, it's, being on podcasts, it's having a social presence. So it's sort of that where people feel like this person has this platform and they're out there speaking about it. So those are all very important, elements to actual thought leadership. If you have an executive who maybe isn't quite there yet, maybe they have an opinion, you want to get them out there, but maybe the company isn't, an Apple, it's not an Adobe or a Meta, right? They're like a smaller Series B growth company, whatever. One thing we love to do at Remix is to look at who can we partner you with on stage. And so one thing that we do is try to get inside the organizer's head about, they're doing this event, what would be an amazing session at that event? So for example, and we 2 years ago at South by Southwest put together this incredible session of women leaders, and 2 of them were our clients and 2 were not. So we had VPs and general managers from Adobe, Stitch Fix, who are our clients. And then we invited Microsoft and LinkedIn and talk about serious powerhouse, talking about an inclusive tech culture. So it was, hugely successful, sold out room, tons of PR around it, lots of social. So that's an example where you can, in that case, we had really big names, obviously, but we could add on even more big names to make this incredible session. And then an example of a client we have right now who is not as well known, and we're trying to get them into their number one conference in their vertical. So the way that we're doing that is partnering the CEO founder with a nationally known expert in that field who is willing to do it. And so we're putting them together in a fireside chat. And I know for a fact that this event really wants that nationally known person. So that is one way that you can sort of kind of create this session that the organizer of the event wants. And of course, the dividends are there for your client.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool. And just talk about what a great opportunity, even for amplification, for
Yeah,
your own personal branding amplification, to have your name alongside these big names. That's huge.
absolutely. And on that note too of amplification, we always look at how do we go outside the room at an event. So it's great if, you have 100 people in the seats hearing the executives speak. That's potentially great if they're all the right people. But what if you could go outside the room and reach 1,000 people, 10,000 people, whatever that is, to be able to have them hear your message. So that's where the role of content comes in, social, really being smart around that.
Well, and that also plays into that demographics conversation that we had a little bit ago, and talking
Mm-hmm.
about knowing your audiences and understanding what's going to appeal to them, but is also a good reminder to think about the global audience, not just the 100 butts that are in seats at this event, but who else could potentially benefit from this.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's key. So, when we're talking and thinking about this amplification, obviously there's social, there's the components where the execs and the social teams for the brands have the opportunity to really blast this out, take snippets, do all the things that we all preach to do. And I think we all think of that like pre-conference and even during, but a big part of it is lost during the post-conference. It
Mm-hmm.
almost seems like once they've taken stage, it just kind of dies and there's
Mm-hmm.
not that excitement anymore. So, what advice do you give to your execs of let's continue to keep this ball rolling, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things you can do, but one thing I love is when we have video of the client speaking, and then you can take that video and use that in a million different ways. And of course, video is great for SEO, right? So you can, pull out certain quotes and put that on LinkedIn and, even make a series of that. So you've all of a sudden have this amazing content that's long lasting. Blog posts that summarize your perceptions of what happened at the event, things that happened on stage, feedback you heard from the audience. All of those things can be used, and those can be tools for post event.
One of the things that I used to love to see in previous lives when I was working events for large corporations was always when the speakers would now take to Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever they wanted to post
Mm-hmm.
it and talk about other people's sessions and say,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I just learned this from this person. That was so powerful to see that they're not only promoting their own session, but they're also interested in what others are having to say.
It's so true. And I think for those people who can't be there, it's really nice for them to hear your opinion about what was hot and what was really timely, interesting, because a lot of times that's where we sort of get the pulse on what's happening, trend wise. People will make announcements at events, and when you start to see, oh my gosh, this is there are huge trends this year around this topic. So it's really I think that can be really good for people who haven't been able to attend to be able to read that and see that content and understand, oh, okay, that's what happened this year. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that ties back into that thought leadership. If
Mm-hmm.
you want to be there and you're going to talk about AI, there's other sessions talking about AI. So what are you gleaning from these sessions that now your audiences could also benefit from?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, and just topic wise, we've seen, a couple of years ago, well, even actually a year and a half ago, NFTs were everywhere. This year,
Every
not so much, right?
no,
So
I
it's like,
haven't seen an NFT session yet.
it's really interesting,
Hmm.
and so I think that that's really important for people to kind of keep track of it, see what's current, what's happening, and it's a good sort of bellwether for what's happening with with the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree wholeheartedly. There's so much opportunity there. So what advice would you offer to execs that are looking for ways to kind of work on their own personal branding to potentially have these speaking engagements? And then
Mhm.
also for the social teams out there, for all of us marketers that are trying to figure out how can we get our execs on these stages and almost get them past that, who wants to hear what I have to say?
Right, right. One of the things that we do when we're working with clients is we work with them in a brainstorming session and try to mine what's the story here? What's your platform? What's your angle? And I think that's super important is to have something that A, you're passionate about, B, it's interesting, C, it's narrow enough. As we were saying, those are all really important points. So I think having those topics and you can customize these obviously for the different events that you're doing, but really being in touch with what are the right events, or the right topics, sorry. But yes, the right events is what I was going to say next. And that's really looking at, where do you want to be? What are the important events for you to be at based on who you want to reach? So, again, understanding who it is, what topics are they, interested in. We really try to get inside the event, like really look at it. What are the tracks that they've said they're interested in? Who are the past speakers? Is your speaker on par with them? So that's really important. Have they covered this topic to death? Maybe it's time for a new twist on it, that kind of thing. So really, doing a deep dive into the event and what's important to them, and sort of tailoring your topics accordingly. And yeah, and
I
then
love the
from
idea of
there,
looking at past speakers. That's so
yes.
smart. Mhm.
Yeah, it really helps. It really helps you understand, is the speaker at the right level? If they only have VP and up, don't go in with a product manager. You won't succeed, right? So sometimes on that note, you can do a little stretch if you are paired with someone who's higher up. Like we were saying, having a customer, that sort of thing, a partner from another company. But generally speaking, the title's super important.
Yeah, I like that. That's really smart. Thanks for sharing that, Katie.
Yeah, for
Something that I don't know
sure.
how many people think to do and to look at that and
Yeah.
really check it
We
out.
we nerd out on this stuff.
Again, you found your calling and it shows.
Exactly. Found our calling.
Exactly. You know exactly what you want and you just go after it. I love it.
Thank you. So fun.
Well, thank you, Katie. This is such good advice, especially as we're looking towards more events this year and really as marketers trying to figure out how can we get our execs on the events train. So hopefully our audiences will find some useful nuggets. I know I did, and to be able to take it as we're planning out events for the rest of the year.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to nerd out with other people on events and speaking.